Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Schneider, TV editor at Variety, and thank you for sticking around for this. So let me bring out our panelists right now. First off, one of the producers, Annabelle, Dunne. Fellow producer, Matthew Parker. And the star of the Caine Mutiny Court-Martial. He is nominated for a Critics' Choice Award for Best Actor in a Limited Series or Movie Made for Television, the one and only Kiefer Sutherland. It's always fun to watch films and television shows like this in front of an audience because you don't get, when you're at home watching alone, the laughter and the gasps. There's a couple of times people were heckling the screen, which I love. You know who you are. There was a lot of nervous laughter, though, especially toward the end when your character starts to get a little unhinged. But a lot of fun to see it in person. First off, before we continue, I do want to recognize two very important people from this who are no longer with us. The great Lance Reddick, who, anyway, he was incredible in everything he did, but the scenes were in here, and especially when the camera just goes on him, and I heard a number of you laugh when he just gives that look of like, what the fuck? No one gives better what the fuck than Lance Reddick. And then also, of course, the late William Friedkin, the director of this project. And Kiefer, that's how I actually wanted to begin, because you were always William's first choice for this role. When did you learn about this, and what did you make when Friedkin personally said, I want Kiefer to do this?
Someone asked me, how did this come about? And it was actually in a really traditional way. A director phoning an actor without an agent, without a studio, asking them if they would be interested in doing the film. I unfortunately decided to make it uninteresting and not usual because I didn't think it was really him. So I hung up thinking it was my friend making a joke, because I've been a William Friedkin fan my whole life. When I was 15 years old, I was working as a theater actor in Toronto, Canada. My mother was a theater actor. It was my introduction into the performing arts. And I went and saw The French Connection, and I'd never seen anything like it. And this is in the day before VHS or DVDs, Beta, and yeah, you all showed your age there. And it was, it changed my life. First of all, the two incredible performances from Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman. I'd never seen anything with that kind of realism. I'd never seen the car chases with that kind of realism. I'd never seen the juxtaposition between two characters, Gene Hackman being brought back to work by his partner, finding out that he's been chained to the bed by a girl he picked up the night before. Mm-hmm. For a 15-year-old, this is all very exciting stuff for the future. And I just didn't realize until I saw that film the incredible opportunity that you had as a storyteller and as someone who could help someone else tell a story. And I went literally at that moment from a very kind of dedicated, I was going to dedicate my life to the theater and what I had grown up in and what I had understood. And after that movie, absolutely wanted to be a film actor and learn about that. So my friends know how much I love his work. And so I honestly thought someone was actually playing a joke on me.
Pranking you as William Friedkin.
And then I think I waited for a minute and I realized I don't have any friends that are that good at pranking me.
Yeah.
And so I had to phone the number back, and he said, I thought it was going to take you longer. And then we had a conversation, and he was just so generous. He was kind of, you're a vital part of making this with me, and it was very funny. He then went on to kind of talk to me about the Caine Mutiny and the history of the book and the history of the play and the history of the film, and I was like, I don't want to be rude, but I don't want to waste your time either. Like, I'm in, I'll do it, right? And if he had phoned me up and said, well, I want to do the phone book, but I'd like you to be in parts A to M, I'd have been cool, I'm in.
Yeah, you're in.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to tell him some of these things about how much his filmmaking had meant to you as a young actor?
No, and I regret that. And I encourage you all, if you get a chance, to watch an interview or two with William Friedkin, and you can find them online. He'll teach you how to swear in a way that you didn't know was possible. And he comes from a time when filmmaking was clearly just not a democracy. And it was a dictatorship, and the directors of that time were the dictators. And I am a huge fan of democracy, but I think as an actor, to understand that one person is going to shoulder the responsibility of connecting all of the variable dots, whether that's cinematography or whether that's music and whether that's editing, and really engage in that responsibility and being able to bring the actors together and get them to work in a way. It's an incredibly comforting place to be, and I've had the great opportunity to work with a number of directors who have made me feel that way. By the time I got to work with Mr. Friedkin, it was an expected experience that you were going to get from him, and all of the energy and focus in our experience, and I think shared when we were making this film, was on this film. And I was worried that if I said, you know, I really love this other film, that he'd punch me. Like, you're wasting time and stop focusing on other stuff. And so I sadly, I did not tell him as much as I would like to have told him what an incredible impression he's made on me and in my life.
Yeah, no, it seems, I mean, very special that it was his final film, so that's got to be pretty meaningful to you as well. And Annabelle and Matthew, kind of the same question. What was it like working with William? What was your experience, in the past with William as well? And what was your experience like with him?
Well, just real quick, I wanted to say that happened where people like hung up on us and we were like, we're calling for William Friedkin. That happened several times to us and our casting director, Denise Jamian.
And we call him Billy, and Billy was a hurricane, absolutely hurricane at 86. And it was a wild ride. It was a dream gig as producers, not without challenges, of course. But just Kiefer, so you know, as I think you do, you were his only choice, and he built his movie around you in that role. And he's not always so generous, because I had a lot of time spent with Billy at the kitchen table working on the script and talking about what he wanted to do, and I would ask him questions, and I said, when did you know Gene Hackman was the guy? And, because Jimmy Breslin was in there for a few weeks, and he said, I knew he was the guy when he won the goddamn Academy Award, not a moment before. And I was like, okay. So he could be tough. But he had real faith in his actors. And I think it's important for everyone in the room to understand that every scene that you saw, particularly with Kiefer, that was probably his first take, maybe his second. Billy truly was a one-take guy, and he expressed that upon everyone at the very beginning of shooting, which was critical for the crew, too. But it put an enormous amount of pressure on the actors. They had to be completely off book day one. And our very, very first day of shooting, and it was a very short shoot, it was about 15 days, and Billy finished in 14. And Kiefer was in the first scene, and it was a very intense scene. And Kiefer walks in, they roll. He did almost 21 pages of dialogue straight in one take, and that we were off. And I just say that so that you really understand that was the level that everyone was bringing, but really Kiefer was setting the bar and encouraging the other actors, this is what we're gonna do here with Billy. This is how it's gonna go. So just so you know, I'm not exaggerating.
Very sweet.
Yeah.
And the crew gave him a standing ovation after that.
Yeah.
How would you, Kiefer, compare this? Just this is sort of, unlike, I'm sure, most of what you've done through the years. How did you kind of approach this? Was it more like a play, or, what kind of really intrigued you about doing this?
Well, again, he did. I hadn't thought about it past that. I agreed to do it, and then I was told the schedule was 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right. Read that email back to me again. No, and then you realize, okay, then he's gonna kind of work on this in the same kind of confines that Alfred Hitchcock did Rope, and it's very possible, and it's a fantastic and exciting idea all of a sudden. And that's the moment when I realized there were going to be no flashbacks or cutaways to the boat. So the story is going to be a complete focused story on testimony, and the audience is going to have a moment through the manipulation of a director on what to believe and how. And there is going to be nothing that's going to verify the truth for you. And so there are fantastic opportunities in that. Having said that, there's very few people that can actually do that. And so when you see the film, and I know you all know this, you're seeing what's seen through the camera's lens. What I'm seeing are 7 individual cameras with 7 individual crews of 3 at a minimum. And they're all moving. This wasn't like a thing on 24 where we have 7 cameras running, but 5 of them are abandoned because they'll probably be blown up. And 3 of them aren't being operated for the same reason, and 2 are moving. All 7 were moving at the same time. This was the most advanced game of Tetris I'd ever seen in my life. And it was like looking into a Swiss watch. And as you said, we're doing 21, 24, 20. The entire second testimony was done in one take, with those 7 cameras moving, looking into a Swiss watch. All it takes is the slightest distraction of one dolly grip bumping accidentally into a focus puller, one camera actually starting to cross into the line of another camera, but they can't see behind them. And then once that camera gets blocked, you know that it's not useful anymore, you know, and that can take you out of the moment. So there was this incredible dance of choreography on the technical side of us making this film that was really just so fascinating. And he got it perfect. All 7 cameras worked absolutely perfectly. They allowed us to perform the scene as if this entire colossal circus in front of us wasn't happening. And that was to his skill of knowing, his crew, but knowing where those cameras needed to be and where they needed to be when he needed them to be there. And you were very right about the first take thing. Billy came to me after that. That's the first time I've ever called him Billy. He asked me to call him Billy a lot, and I said, the best I can do is Mr. Friedkin, because before that I was calling him Sir, because I felt very seriously he deserved that respect. I had worked really hard on learning this, and normally if you're doing a play, you kind of do your work, and you kind of use 4 weeks of rehearsal to kind of bring it up to speed. A dear friend of mine, Beth Elliott, worked with me through the holidays to kind of have it in the kind of shape that we needed it. The idea that I was going to get one crack at it was really disappointing. Jason Clarke, who was one of the best dance partners you could ever hope to have, came on. Yeah, cheers. Yeah, he's extraordinary in this film. He said, and what was amazing with Jason is that he could do the American accent and then go straight back to his Australian accent in between takes and then go back to the American accent. That's mind-numbing to me. But he was like, Kiefer, you got to go tell him, mate. You got to do another fucking take, man. You've earned it. And I'm like, fuck that. You tell him. And he finally convinced me to go ask for the second take. And I went to his video village, and God damn it, he was editing. He was editing already. He was editing the first take into everything else that had been done. Him and his editor were doing it on a computer right there. They were already slicing up the take and everything else. And so I kind of timidly asked if I could do another one, and he kind of barely looked up and said, sure. And I went and did it. And there's a moment in the scene, and Jason knows it too, where I cracked a little. And I have a tendency that sometimes my eye can drift in and almost kind of disappear. And there was a moment halfway through this 28-minute sequence where I realized I could hear the film that we were shooting kind of gently fluttering in the sky as it was going to hit the floor of an editing room somewhere at Burbank, and that he had no intention of ever using this second take, and that Jason and I were just wasting everybody's time.
And indeed, he definitely used that first take.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he'd already cut it in, and I just, yeah.
I'd heard that story about the fact that he was editing. He had an editor right there, so
Yeah.
to make sure that the shots were right, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And by the way, the fact that Guillermo del Toro was sitting right there next to him the entire time, too.
Yeah.
On an Apple box. Yeah.
Well, and J.J. Abrams not far behind, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
on day one.
the number of just because of the insurance need to bond the film, we had to have a second director that if something, God forbid, were to happen to Mr. Friedkin, they would take over. And it was just so reassuring, the kind of sense of community. Every once in a while you'll see it, right? You don't see it very often, but that was something that was really special. I mean, you had some serious directors that wanted to support Mr. Friedkin and making sure that he was going to be able to make this film.
It's incredible. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Annabelle and Matthew, take us through sort of the origins process, because obviously this is a project that's well known. It's been done several times through the years, film and also early on the golden age of television. This is a work that a lot of people know from back in the day, but maybe hadn't seen in a while. What was it about this project? Who sort of originated this in sort of doing an updated version?
Billy. It was all Billy. He loved this piece, and when he and I first spoke about putting this together, he was circling it. He was talking to the Herman Wouk estate. He was really mortified that I didn't have more reverence for Herman Wouk, who's Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. And I just said, it's not really taught in school as much anymore. And he was appalled. But he loved the written word. I mean, and he really stayed true to that. And he updated it, and he sliced parts out because he knew that the audience was smart enough to keep up. But it was sometimes, he really, really didn't want to stray far from that original piece, which is actually a play version of the Court-Martial. So there's the original movie with Humphrey Bogart, and then this was put off of a play. And he loved that format. He had done it with 12 Angry Men. It worked. Billy was incredibly straightforward. He said, I'm 86. This works for me. I need to shoot it in this format. And he said, it's going to be all about the actors. The performances are going to carry it. And that's the way it's going to go. I mean, and he had the movie in his mind from then. So.
Yeah, I think we edited for 3 weeks after wrap before we locked picture. So that tells you kind of how much he knew.
Do you want this version or this version? That's it. Two versions. Yeah.
And you mentioned the film, but it's still it's very golden age of television as well. Sort of those classics from back in the day, the Playhouse 90 kind of vibe to it as well. What were sort of what would you say the aesthetics that maybe you were going for, and some of the conversations, and what this was going to look like, and how this was going to be updated for 2024?
It was Paths of Glory. Yeah. Paths of Glory was important for him with the production designer. And he had a wonderful consultant named Dale Dye, who's been on many, many military movies.
Who's in the film.
Who's in the film. He's the silver-haired gentleman at the table, a retired Marine. He was really helpful Billy said, I want to set it now somewhere kind of near Bahrain. What's the ship look like? What are the circumstances? Let's keep it vague, but I want it to feel rooted in today, and so Dale helped him sort that out. And obviously the uniforms and things needed to be accordingly changed. But he didn't change much, and that was very, very intentional. He was loath to take a writing credit. He felt incredibly humble about that. And he said, I'm directing this. This is a Herman Wouk piece. But so.
Yeah.
And in terms of kind of golden age of television, he had done 12 Angry Men with Showtime before,
Yeah.
and he had such a good experience with that and how he made that it really shaped how this was made. And I think he was really self-aware of what he could do and couldn't do, and so the appeal of being in kind of one set the whole time was huge for him.
So Kiefer, what was your prep like for this? What did you go back and watch some of the originals? What was sort of your history with this work, or were you new to?
No, I knew the film incredibly well. I think Humphrey Bogart gave one of the great performances of his career. I think if you watch going from the Maltese Falcon to Sierra Madre to Casablanca, and you get to the African Queen, then you get to kind of his performance here. He was shedding a lot of the kind of characteristics of actors of the 30s and 40s where they were still playing to the back row. And so he started to become much more insular as a performer. And it was incredibly exciting and riveting at that time because actors like Jimmy Dean and Marlon Brando were the actors that were doing those kinds of performances, and he was actually open to it, which I thought was really kind of fascinating. So I knew the film incredibly well, but I had it, and I think we all kind of take something of ourselves into defining a character, and certainly when we're reading the material, why it's moving us. And so the part for me, I latched on to two things, and they kind of collide. And there's two things, and they are all about age and what happens to someone as they start to get older. And I think we all in our minds, from a very early age, have this idea of who we are. And I think very sadly for a lot of people at some point, they come to terms with who they are, not who they want to be. And when those two things intersect, depending on the divide, it can be catastrophic. And clearly Queeg wanted to be and thought he was something he wasn't. And during this trial, he starts to realize the truth of who he is. And it's heartbreaking. And it's so sad and so tragic because by the time you start to realize that, there's very little else you can do. And the other thing is also brought about by age, which is realizing that you're becoming less relevant and maybe even irrelevant. And Queeg was so necessary in the context of the play, was so necessary to the United States Navy during World War II. He was not that necessary now, and so he was much easier to deal with his kind of idiosyncrasies, his oddities, his behavior, and in many ways, this was about how do we get rid of him as quietly and discreetly as possible. And that's a heartbreaking moment too. And so I latched onto those two things. I'm not justifying his behavior, but none of us are perfect. And I latched onto the fact that this was someone who was actually realizing that he was worse than he thought. And that's heartbreaking. And that's what moved me so much through the whole piece. And there's a couple physical moments, whether it's his foot that he's got at such an awkward angle. It's because he's in pain. And these are moments, his thumb's going the whole time. That's how fast his heart is beating inside. So he's completely stoic, but inside it's a storm. His heart's beating like a hummingbird. And this is someone whose whole life is being taken down and revealed for who he now is. And it's a terrible image. And he's brokenhearted for it. And so once you can latch onto that, and that brings about a huge emotion, and then you just spend the rest of the time trying to hide it. And then all of a sudden, you kind of are there. And as long as Billy tells you, you're there.
Were there any military dramas or courtroom dramas that you sort of were inspired by?
Well, 12 Angry Men, absolutely. And in all fairness, both versions of that. Yeah, and again, we discuss human emotions differently than they did in the 30s, than the 50s, than the 60s and the 70s. Our interpretation of what we are all going through as people in our time, in our society, is going to be unique. And so any production of kind of something as intimate, as 12 Angry Men or the Caine Mutiny is going to provoke and evoke, if properly approached, a very unique response from the audience of today that's going to see it and the people that make it. Because I guarantee you that in 1950, there was no term mental health issue, right? There were so many different things. And so just by the nature of the way our world has changed, our interpretation of this material is going to change, and therefore the way we portray it is going to change. And so I was very proud to be a part of the film because I thought it was a very emotional version of this story.
Yeah, and again, just the feat of what you all pulled off in doing something like this. I mean, that one take still, yeah, right. I mean, pretty incredible, and you know.
Well, we'll never see the second one, so who knows? Maybe it was the only good one ever.
That needs to. If there were still DVDs, they could put that on the extras.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be a way to show it somewhere.
He will reach down from somewhere and crush it.
Indeed. Well, I think that about wraps things up. Stick around for the reception after, but thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely.